Okay, we are going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate you all being here. Before anything, let me just drop in the chat. That's our link right there to our page on the website. If you'd like to catch up on any of our past classes or review anything, so that you can always find it there. I actually have been told that there's been a bit of a lag in getting the past classes up on the website, so they should be coming up in the next day or two. So in case anybody's been looking and has not found them, that's where they are. They're at they should be there soon, at least. So we are now in the middle of the 5th chapter of Kohelet, where we've been discussing a couple different things. The chapter started, or actually the last chapter ended, with this discussion of when a person is in the process of trying to grow in their connection to God and try to do better things or lead a better life, it's very common for us to make the choice to jump in with both feet and to kind of be a little overly excited when we are on our way to growing to the next steps in our Judaism or wherever it is that we're trying to grow into. However, what he warns is that it's not necessarily the right thing to do. A person has to be careful to do that properly, to think through what they want to do and make sure that it's something that's appropriate for them and they're not trying to jump in too quickly with they have to make sure not to jump in too quickly and kind of weigh out and measure out and make sure that they're taking the right steps at the right time. So that's been kind of the theme at the beginning of the chapter. And the last week we moved on to the second theme of the chapter, which at first glance did not seem to be related at all. What we find is that he starts talking about that we have societies where, as he's mentioned before, we have societies where the poor, the less privileged are not taken care of. And what is it that causes those societies to end up that way? You know, how does a civilization end up with people not being taken care of? And basically, what he brings up is this fact that there's everyone has an excuse. Everyone's got somebody to blame it on. All right. So we talked about this idea that there's, every person has the ability to say, well, you talk to my supervisor. And the supervisor says, oh, you talk to my supervisor. And at the end of the day, there's always somewhere where you could pass the buck. And even with the leader, the greatest, the top leader of the generation, whatever what we would consider like a king, he says even the king has something to fall back on. The king is busy with other things. This is outside of my purview. I don't have the ability to take care of this. So at the end of the day, no one has the job of taking care of this societal issue. And what ends up happening is never gets taken care of. So I was when we were talking last week and going through this last week, I was trying to figure out what is the connection between the first piece of the chapter where he's talking about not jumping in with 2 feet and being careful when you take the new steps, and the second part where he's saying that what breaks down our society is the fact that you have people are always able to blame or to shift the responsibility to somebody else. And after thinking about it, I think there is a connection. It's not a direct connection. It's kind of an indirect connection over here. He's not forced to make a connection. I think he's building a larger foundation for an idea. So he doesn't have to necessarily connect the ideas. One could have just been a parenthetical statement. However, I think there is a bit of a connection over here in that when we're talking about being careful with making jumps and moving up to the next level and rising in your personal service or personal growth, so he said to be very careful about that and take it slow and be very wary of it. I think what he wants us to see also is that itself can lead to a wrong attitude. That can lead to an attitude of, you know what, I won't bother growing, or I could basically settle myself into I could get stuck in this little spot where I'm comfortable. And I think the juxtaposition of these two ideas really kind of brings this to a point where he's saying also don't get comfortable where you are. First of all, be careful when you make the next step, when you jump into the next level, when you rise to the next rung on the ladder, and when you take on new things. But also don't get complacent and don't get stuck where you are. Don't be like these members of these bureaucrats who are able to constantly push off their job to somebody else. That complacency is something that you also have to be wary of. So I think it's this, as he does throughout the entire book, he's weighing these opposites, these two ideas that they both are true. There's no question that that's a fundamental theme of the book of Ecclesiastes, is that two ideas that are seemingly opposites can both be true at the same time. You have to be very wary when you take a step, when you jump to the next step of your service, of your growth, or whatever it is. But you also have to not get stuck where you are, like these bureaucrats. Now, I don't think that's the point of this piece of the chapter. I think there's a reason for the juxtaposition, though. So that's just to address one point we left hanging last week, is why connect these sets of verses. See, that I think that's one idea, is that don't get stuck in either way. Don't get too complacent where you don't make any moves, but also be careful when you make moves. Make sure it's being done with forethought and with a proper meditation. So I think that is two ideas. That's just to reconcile that seeming discrepancy in the verses. With that, I'm going to jump back into the text, where we'll pick up actually from the same verse we left off last week. I think we just had one more point to get up to talk about over there, and then we will move on to the next verse. So if everyone can see my screen, let me just take a second and get it set up on my side. Okay, and that is verse number 9 over here. And we said last week that fine, you've got this country, this land, whatever it is, this system which is broken down particularly because of the fact that people are shifting the blame, they're passing the buck on to the next person. So what is it? We said last week, what's the motivating factor for that? What's causing people to live this life of not wanting to do their jobs and not wanting to take responsibility for their actions? And so we got into this verse over here, verse number 9, where he says, let me translate it again. Ohev kesef lo yispa kesef. Somebody who loves money, who loves cash, will not be satisfied with cash. And that is really the main motivating factor for what is it? You have a bureaucrat who's stuck in their position. Nobody ever wants to get them out. They've not done anything in 50 years. They're comfortably settled into their position. And what is it that's pushing them? Well, it's a thirst, it's a hunger for whether it's here he says money, but I think it's more than just money. It's money, it's power, it's any number of those types of things. Those things that you might not necessarily realize you want so much. Once you get a little taste for it, then it's hard to give up. Not just hard; you will never be satisfied with it. So those people who are stuck in power forever, which we have quite a few of them in our government now. All right, they've just been in a power position forever. Of course they don't want to leave. They want it to go away. So even if they have like he said in the last verse before this, even if they have the ability to take care of an issue, they have what it takes, right? They're the king, whatever it is. They have the ability to take care of an issue. They're not going to be motivated to do that because the fact that there's an issue is what's keeping them in power. The fact that there's an issue is what's keeping them them in their state, and they'd rather that. As they say, you never let a good crisis go to waste. That's a famous political theory, right? You always want to be working on some crisis. So in that sense over here, I think that's what he's trying to bring up is Ohev kesef lo yispa kesef, that one who loves money, and again, money, power, any of those types of things, will never be satisfied with money. At the same time, in kind of a parenthetical statement over here, he says, Umi ohev behamon, one who loves so much, who wants everything in life, lo sibua, will not even end up with grain, with the very basic staples. So somebody who's so stuck and so focused on getting everything will never really have anything. And that's, there's any number of ways you could go with that. Probably the simplest way is saying that if you can't even taste satisfaction, if you're so stuck in this cycle of wanting more and more that you can never actually achieve satisfaction. So even those staples, even those very basic things, grain being the absolute staple, that you'll never have it. You'll be stuck wanting it. You'll never have enough. So unfortunately, it's a reality of life that the more we want, the more we, sorry, if somebody develops a relationship of love to these things, somebody who loves money or loves just everything, the overwhelming plenty, that person will never actually achieve any of his desires, because it's at the end of the day, they will never be satisfied. The rabbis say over here, based on this verse, and many other verses, and they say that somebody never leaves this world with half the things that they wanted to get. You always want to. There's always more that you're going to want, and you're never going to even achieve half of them. Similarly, they say that somebody who has $50 wants $100. Somebody has $100 wants $200. It never ends. You always say, once I have this threshold, then I'll be happy. And it's not really actually true. Last point is, he says over here, Gamze Havel. This is also Havel. So we've spoken about Havel before many times. That Havel is this idea that it's, in general, this is a bad thing. We're going to admit that this is something that's not helpful, but there's something to gain from it. Just like steam, you can distill it and get something out of it. There is something to greed. The famous line from the movie, right? Greed, for lack of a better term, is good. There is something to gain from greed. Greed does that desire for money has led to so many important innovations in history and changed the world, and it is an important thing and does have a redeeming quality. But for you personally, it's a dangerous thing. So I think that's why he's referring to it as Havel, meaning that don't throw it away entirely, but figure out that realize that for the most part, it's more damaging than for you personally than it is helpful. Perhaps for society it's something helpful, but not necessarily for you personally. So that takes us to the next verse over here, verse number 10. Let me highlight that, easier to see. And this is a very similar idea, but he changes one general thought over there, which is, he says, Birvot hatova rabu ochaleha. With the increasing of goodness, there increases those who eat it. The eaters have increased also, those who eat it. Okay, that's the structure of that word over there, ochaleha, its eaters, those who eat it. So that's referring to the goodness mentioned over here. With an increase of goodness, there's an increase of those who consume it, of consumers. Uma kishron levaleha, and what is prepared for its owners, ki imruut einav, besides for what their eyes can see. Okay. Again, let me read that all together again. Birvot hatova, with an increase of goodness, rabu ochalal, there's an increase of consumers. Uma kishron levaleha, and what preparation is done for its owners, for its owners, ki imruut einav, besides for that which their eyes can see. Okay, and you'll notice over here there's another case where ru'ut, it's written one way, that's in the parentheses over here. It's written as riyat or ri'iyat, the vision of their eyes, and it's read ru'ut einav, what their eyes can see. What's the difference? That one I don't have an explanation for. It's a very minor difference, that basically that letter yud is changed into a vav. So they're very similar. I don't know exactly why there's a difference, or what would be implied with that difference between how it's read and how it's written and how it's read. So, but just so you know that is there. So let's see that one more time. With an increase of good, there is an increase of consumers. And what is prepared for the owners, besides for that which their eyes can see. So I think there's one point that he's bringing up over here, which is it's like actually kind of an interesting idea because it's true both physically, it's physically true, empirically true, I would say, but it's also true in a kind of a societal way, in that the more good there is, the more consumers there are. So we've seen that historically. We've seen that on a again in a physical in a way, that the more food there is, there's an increase in population, right? That's we've seen that, I mean, particularly over the past 150 years, just the amount, once you have an increase in supply of food, there is also more people to feed. um, and that's been an amazing thing. We have got so many humans on this planet that people are worried about overpopulation, or have been for now 50 years or so, since the 1970s. So that's so that is an interesting thing, just from again a it's actually true, so to speak. Um, but I think it also ties into what we're talking about, which is we have this society which is built on people who are passing the buck. They're not taking responsibility for anything, and they're leaving crises unchecked. Right? They have there's a reality that there's people who are not being taken care of, that society is not taking care of, and they're feeding off of that. Their power comes from the fact that this crisis it stays and it is stuck there. So in that sense, also, I think there's a point he's bringing out over here, which is, okay, what would be the response to that? The response perhaps may be throw goodness at them, right? So let's increase the goodness. Let's just throw, like we always say, we throw money at the problem. And he points out that when you do that, when you just throw goodness at it, when you just increase the goodness, fine. There's a problem, people are not being taken care of. Let's just make everybody's lives better. Let's do something, take some move to increase the goodness in the world, and not address the actual problems. So in that case, you'll end up with actually more consumers, more people. Oh, we've seen this. The government's handing out free stuff. Maybe it's worth taking advantage of that. So in this case, also, you have a society which is built on people trying to avoid addressing the issue. They want the issue to stay, but they also want to show that they're doing something about it. So bervot tatova, right? Let's increase the goodness. Let's just throw money at the problem, so to speak. So when that happens, it doesn't actually satisfy those who are who need the help. It just increases the number of people who need help. Rabu ocheleha, there's more consumers. Again, something we've seen. We were talking last week, and so taking that example, I recently filled out my primary ballot for Portland, Multnomah County, etc. And so it was fascinating to see that every single candidate had some sort of platform about homelessness. That is the question facing us right now: homelessness. And it's very clear. We've seen that with okay, not to get political about this, but when there's a loosening of laws regarding homelessness, there's an increase of homeless people in the area. I've seen that in Seattle, Portland, and all across the West Coast, and many places across the country. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a solution to the problem. There must be some solution to the problem, and there must be something to do about it. But what he's saying over here is, you can't just throw money at it. That doesn't help. You can't just say, here, figure it out, because then you end up with more consumers, right? You have more people who need this help than you had at first. So that is not a solution necessarily to the issue. I'll hold off on what I was going to say. So anyway, so again, I think that's one of the things he's trying to say over here is, you can't just you have to actually address an issue for it to go away. You can't just increase goodness, make everything better, unicorns, rainbows, and everything's going to be fantastic. No, you can't do that. There's got to be some actual action that's done to make a change, to do something about it. But that's not going to happen in a society where everyone gets to pass the buck to the next person. Um, so at the end, when a person, in the end of the day, when you have this person who has tried this strategy of just throwing money at the problem, throwing goodness at the problem, what do they end up with in the end of the day? What actually has been prepared for the owners, for those who have done that, all, who've thrown money at the problem? What do they actually get out of it? All they have is what their eyes can see. I don't have a great understanding, a great translation of or explanation of what he's trying to say over here. But what occurred to me was that we have at the very end of the day, when everything has been, when you have this person whose entire political career is built on promises, is built on passing the buck, on not taking responsibility, their entire stance, their entire stature is built on really nothing. It's built on just the will of the people, the fact that the people have given them this power for this period of time. So at the very most, it's ru'ut enough. It's visibly there, but there's nothing actually there for the person to walk away with. They don't have any actual dominion, any actual power. The power is entirely a mirage. It's not really there. It's built on something fleeting. You have the look of their eyes, that which their eyes can see. It's not actually there. So, what do the owners have to walk away with? What is their actual power from everything that they've done when they've held on to their positions forever and they've just thrown money at problems and never actually addressed the issue? Their everything is built on just a mirage. So I think that's kind of what he's trying to give over here. But again, it's not a perfect. It doesn't perfectly fit the words. I didn't come up with a very satisfying explanation of what these words mean and what they're trying to tell us. So okay, that's fine. We can do that sometimes. I think it's worthwhile to keep going because we're going to see him talking about other sections of the same society now, and that's going to be verse 11 over here. And I actually have this is my father-in-law, who is a very hardworking man. This is his favorite verse in all of the Torah, because after a hard day's work, he is very tired and likes to, collapses into bed. And that's these first three words over here, mituka shenata oved. It is sweet, the sleep of the one who works hard. The one who works sleeps soundly. Okay, after a hard day's work, it's easy to fall asleep. You fall into bed, and it's sweet. It's actually sweet. It's actually something that you can look forward to and enjoy. You don't really think of sleep is a funny thing in general. We do enjoy sleep, but in the end of the day, you don't actually experience it. You don't experience sleep. You're asleep and then you wake up. There's nothing. You're not conscious the entire time in the middle. But you walk away with something. Either you are exhausted and you get to go to sleep, which there's something to that. You get to wake up and then you feel refreshed, hopefully, less often than I'd like, right? But actual sleep itself is not a real experience. It's a break in reality. But somebody who works hard can actually achieve sweetness from the sleep itself. The sleep itself becomes something sweet. It's just a curious thought. I don't know how, but there's something there. So the im ma'at v'im harbe, whether it's a little or a lot. So again, metukashna toved im ma'at v'im harbe. The sleep of the one who works is sweet, whether it's a little or a lot. Sorry, im ma'at v'im harbe yochel. I made a mistake. There's one last word of that sentence. Whether he eats a lot or a little, whether that person eats a lot or a little, the sleep is sweet. Okay, so whether the worker walks away with a lot at the end of the day and is able to satisfy their hunger, whether or not, the sleep is still sweet. However, the satisfaction that the wealthy person experiences does not allow them to sleep. Okay, lishon is the same shoresh, the same root word as shanat over here. So again, it's the same sleep. So there's a contrast being put over here. The one who works hard, their sleep is sweet, whether they have a lot of other things, whether they have enough food to live on, whether the sleep is good. Okay, as opposed to the wealthy person, The satisfaction that they have does not allow them to sleep. It doesn't let them sleep. Maniach means to put down or to let something happen. So let me read the verse all together one more time. Sorry. Mitukashna toved. The sleep of the worker is sweet. Imad v'im harbe yochel, whether they eat a little or a lot. V'hasava le'ashir, however, the satisfaction of the wealthy, einenu maniach lo lishon, does not allow them to sleep. Okay. It's interesting over here, just first of all, that he is contrasting two groups of people, not necessarily the powerful or the underprivileged or anything like that. It's not those aren't the adjectives he uses over here. What he uses is the oved, the one who works, and the ashir is the one who's wealthy. That's actually a pretty interesting thing. I wouldn't necessarily make those the opposites, because you could have an ashir, somebody who's wealthy, who is also a hard worker. It's very, very common, and very often that's the case. So I find it interesting that is his contrast that he gives us, is that we're dealing with the worker and the wealthy as two opposites. It's possible. I would say that we're talking about a specific society, a society where there's there's this corruption everywhere, where people are holding on to power with no actual nothing to actually show for it. They haven't actually earned their power. They just are, are inherently powerful because of their positions. So in that case, I think perhaps that's where he's saying that that's a society where you're going to have this clear distinction between two groups of people. The powerful, by their nature, have to be the wealthy or the privileged of some sort, as opposed to the ones who are lower on the food chain are by nature the workers. Obviously, Karl Marx would love this verse, right? He would say, look, here's the wealthy on one side, there's the workers, there's the proletariat and the bourgeois, and so yeah, he was a Jew who couldn't care less about what the Torah said. But here you go. Here we have a verse that would work very well into his theory, where you have workers versus the man, workers versus the wealthy. Again, could be that just in this society that he's building, this mashal, this parable that he's building of a society, could be that is where he wants it to look. He wants it to be that the powerful are the wealthy, they are the ones on top, as opposed to the workers, who you can't say, we don't even know if they have enough to eat, whether they have a lot or a little to eat. They have one thing though, they have their sleep, which the wealthy doesn't even have. Meaning that the wealthy has all this satisfaction, but in the end of the day, their lives are taking them and tearing them into pieces. They're not being allowed to sleep. Now, sleep being that funny thing that we're talking about is, it's something that it would almost be nice. Imagine if we could have a life without sleep. It would almost be nicer if we didn't have to sleep. We could get more stuff done. Well, these wealthy people that we're talking about, they don't even have the luxury of sleep, which is something that now so sorry, I skipped a step there. It would be nice if we didn't need sleep, but we do need sleep, and it becomes a luxury. It becomes something that's can have tremendous sweetness to it, that is important and necessary for our lives. If you don't have sleep, if a person, now that we have a world that sleep is a necessity, so if you don't have sleep, you go crazy. It could, when a person is really going through something hard, that's when sleep seems to elude them. And I think that's what we're saying over here, is that it's more of a sign to, it's a more of it shows what the situation really is like. If a person is not able to sleep, that means something's going on. That means their life that looks so nice and pretty on the outside is actually a lot worse than they think it is, than we think it is. So they're not even able to sleep. They're suffering from insomnia. It's because they've got too much going on in their lives. It's not even pleasant. as opposed to the worker who at the end of the day gets to sit down, lie down, put his head on the pillow, put her head on the pillow, and just go to sleep. And interestingly enough, is a lot of the commentaries over here seem to understand that the Oved, the one who's working, hard, is somebody who works in agriculture. That's a lot of the commentaries focus on agriculture over here. That we're talking about the farmer who is working this hard, and that's the person who gets to sleep well at night, as opposed to the one who is wealthy, which is, I guess, the businessman or something like that, business person. So in that sense, it's also an interesting contrast that we're talking about the one who works on the fields, who works in agriculture. Famously, Thomas Jefferson said that God loves the farmers, those who work in agriculture, because they have a connection to God. It's just an interesting idea that there is something to putting in clear, obvious hard work and walking away, and something grows from it. And whether it's a good harvest or a bad harvest, whether you get a lot out of it or not out of it, but you get to sleep well at the end of the day. That means your life is actually pleasant. That means your life is actually, it's something that you want to live if you're able to sleep. As opposed to somebody who is not able to sleep at all, that means that their waking hours are so stressful, are tearing them apart, that they're not able to sleep. Obviously, that's not a medical diagnosis. This is just a theoretical idea. So I think that's kind of what he's trying to say over here. Is that maybe look at how you sleep, trying to think, is this something that, what does this say about my life also? Am I sleeping well? It gives you a better sense. It's a good thermometer of how your actual life satisfaction is. Again, obviously, a medical diagnosis is a whole different thing. A person can't sleep for another reason, but it's something to consider, that your sleep is a good sign of how well you're actually enjoying life, how well you're satisfied with your day-to-day. Okay. With that, let's move on to the next verse. And we're going to start seeing, he's going to talk, these are actually some pretty, as I mentioned last week, these are some pretty well-known verses we're getting into, because this is his screed against wealth. And we're talking, by the way, one of the wealthiest men in human history, from what we have brought down in our tradition. His wealth was stolen by somebody else and then transferred to somebody else, and over time it got into the hands of Alexander and all sorts of other people, and it was a large storehouse of tremendous amounts of gold. So he was a very wealthy man himself. So he's one who can talk about wealth. Sorry, I just want to address this. Yosef is asking, is this talking about a feudal type system? The land gentry was usually in a perilous spot because the king could take their land away on a whim. Yeah, that's a point also. In that discussion of, everybody has somebody else on top of them that they could, throw the blame onto. I guess that's a point also. I didn't think of that. When your entire power comes from the fact that you can pass the buck onto somebody else, well, that somebody else does that. That person retains a level of power over you. That means that your safety and your power is built on something else, and that person can take that away from you. I didn't think about that like that. Perhaps this entire series of verses could be rethought in that same way. I don't know. I would have to think through that and consider that. I'm more looking at it as I've been seeing these verses as a commentary on a purely capitalist society. Not to say there's anything wrong with capitalism. Again, it's something that greed has a role to play. But I think it's worthwhile noting the good and bad of everything. So I think that's how I've been understanding. Again, I think it's very possible, Yosef, that you're right. We could understand all these verses into a different society. They're probably, knowing King Solomon and how wise he was, I would say you could probably fit this into every social, hierarchical structure. There's always these ideas, I think, can serve as a lesson to every period of history. I'm just speaking from what we see now, so that's why I'm talking about that now. Okay, so now, yeah, as I said, he's going to be going on and talking about wealth and how it's not as good as it seems. And so that's what he's going to be going on for the next couple verses over here, is that wealth doesn't answer all your questions. And sorry, a second here. And not only that, it can actually provide more issues. It could create more issues than solutions. So that's what we're going to be seeing. Let's see verse number 12. There is a sickening badness that I have seen under the sun. Osher shamur leva'alav lirato, wealth that is held for its owners, that is guarded for its owners for their bad, to their detriment. Again, let's see that again. There is a sickening badness that I have seen under the sun. Osher shamur levalav lirato, wealth that is held for its owners to their detriment. Okay. I'm specifically translating as a sickening badness. If it was chola ra'ah, then it would be a bad sickness. The fact is, so in English, we put the predicate. I can never remember how it works. Put the predicate in the subject, right? So this is we put the predicate before the subject, right? So it's a bad sickness. In Hebrew, it's the opposite. So it's the sickness. The sickness is the subject. The ra'ah is the adjective over here. So yesh ra'ah chola, there is a badness. I'm sorry, the other way. There is, adjective. I'm sorry. There is a badness. Anyway, I had the whole thing backwards. There is a ra'ah. There is something bad, chola, which can make you sick. That I have seen, that I have seen under the sun. Okay, so that's why I'm translating like that. Meaning, it can make one sick to see this, but you see sometimes that wealth is being held is being held by its owners for their own detriment. Okay, and this is something that we see, we can see all the time. It was people that actually their wealth is more painful for them. It causes them more problems than anything else than if they didn't have wealth. It ruins their lives, right? The obvious example is the terrible reality of somebody who actually wins the lottery. We all buy a lottery ticket. We think, oh, it's going to be great. I have all my plans. I'll give 75% of it to the shul right away, to the kola right away. It never happens like that, or rarely ever happens like that. And more often than not, people end up with less money than they started with before the lottery, because it can ruin a person's life. The Mitzudah, which is Mitzudat Sion, which is one of the commentaries here on the verses, he says that there's different types of wealth, and this is actually, he's echoing an idea that the rabbis mentioned in multiple places in some of the Musar books, the self-help books, so to speak, of Judaism. So he's echoing this idea, which is that there's wealth that's good, there's wealth that helps out. A Jewish community, we wouldn't survive without some wealth to pass around. Obviously, we want to make sure you need to have money for programs, you need to have money for shuls, and you need to have money to support your family. There's wealth that's appropriate, and it's good for you. But what he's saying over here is there is a type of thing of wealth. There's a type of wealth that has no purpose. It's not helping the person. It's not giving them better, making their lives better. All it's doing is making things worse. It's attracting the attention of the government. It's attracting the attention of other people. It's all it's caused them is problems. So obviously it shouldn't just be taken. A person has wealth, their life is worse off. No, some people do have a better life because of their wealth. It does happen. But this is what he's saying. It can make you sick when you see it. Sometimes you find people that their wealth has done nothing for them and just caused them pain. So I think that's what he's trying to say over here, is that we, again, in this kind of this discussion of evaluate your own life, right? How well do you sleep at night? So evaluate your own wealth also, right? How does your wealth make your life different? Does your wealth make you a happier person? Does it make you a less busy person? Does it make you a more helpful person? Or does it, cause you to just have, many more things to do and a lot more worry? And we're going to see more about it, what exactly the worries are. I mean, obviously some of them are obvious. We're going to have, the fact that you could lose it at any time. So you get used to a certain lifestyle and it could just disappear. That can happen, right? We're going to see that in the next verse next week. But there's all sorts of things that wealth can make less pleasant in your life. And so that's, again, I would say that part of what he wants us to do is do the self-evaluation. How well are you sleeping? How well is your wealth treating you if you merit wealth, right? We know that the rabbis tell us, sages tell us that there's if you ask the soul on its way down to earth, you're just a pure soul without a body. If you ask the soul, would you rather be wealthy or poor? The soul would say, I'd rather be poor, right? There's much less temptation for the poor. It's our bodies that wants the wealth. So anyway, again, wealth is not in and of itself a bad thing. It's a tool. Question is, what is your personal, if a person is wealthy, what is your personal wealth doing for you? Is it something that you can use? Is it something that is a tool and lets you help improve your life and help other people? Or is it something that's shamur leva, love l'rato, something that you're holding on to and it's just your detriment? So we're out of time, so we'll pick up next week. Let me jump back into the regular screen. And okay, thank you all for joining us. We will, God willing,